Port Ustra was a kind of place the galaxy forgot, a rusting patchwork of neon lights and broken promises where the rich floated above the clouds and the poor fought for scraps in the gutters. Down on level 47, where sunlight never reached, 17-year-old Cale Morgan was finishing another double shift at the Crimson Diner, his shirt soaked in sweat and synthetic spice. He moved like someone used to being invisible, fast, quiet, careful. The alien customers barely looked at him as they barked orders in languages he didn't understand. Humans were rare here, and the few who lived among the stars mostly served drinks, scrubbed floors, or carried heavy things. Cale did all three. But even in this brutal place, he never let the universe harden him. He joked with the dishwashers, shared his tips with a kid who'd been fired last week, and still found time to read to his grandmother before bed. She was the reason he worked like this. Her lungs were failing, and every credit he earned went toward overpriced medicine that barely kept her alive. Tonight, though, his pockets were lighter than ever. Half his paycheck had gone to rent, the other half to a small bag of noodles he planned to split with his grandmother for dinner. As he stepped into the damp night air, the food still warm in his hands, Cale reminded himself that tomorrow would be better. It had to be. That's when he saw him, an alien slump against a rusted wall, clothes shredded and eyes dull with exhaustion. His blue skin was hidden under layers of grime, and his thin hands trembled from hunger. Most passers-by didn't even glance his way. Some kicked empty cans at his feet. Cale stopped. He knew what hunger looked like. He felt it often enough himself. And without thinking twice, he knelt beside the stranger and held out his only meal. "Hey," Cale said softly, "I think you need this more than I do." The alien blinked, startled. "You would give this to me?" Cale smiled, tired, genuine, and a little embarrassed. "Yeah, it's not much, but it's hot, and it's real." It was a small kindness, but it was the moment everything began to change. For 3 days after the alley encounter, Cale tried to convince himself nothing extraordinary had happened. He'd fed a hungry man, that was all, but the universe had other plans. It started with a knock on their rusted apartment door at sunrise. No one ever visited them, not in this part of the city. On the doorstep hovered a sleek, silver delivery drone bearing the insignia of a company Cale had only ever seen in Holovids, Ustramed, the most expensive medical supplier in the quadrant. "Delivery for Cale Morgan," the mechanical voice chirped. After a quick retinal scan, the drone deposited a sealed crate and zipped away. Inside were boxes upon boxes of premium medication, a year's supply of the same treatment Cale had been rationing for his grandmother. No bills, no sender name, only a note, printed in elegant script. "For your kindness, consider this an investment." Cale stared at the words until they blurred. It didn't make sense. Who would do this? And why? Before he could process it, another surprise arrived. This time, a formal envelope marked with the seal of the Galactic Intercultural Academy. Cale laughed at first, assuming it was a cool joke. The academy was a place for alien diplomats' children, for people born into wealth and privilege. People like him didn't even dream about it. But the invitation was real. It offered a full scholarship, tuition, housing, even health care for his grandmother. It praised his exceptional empathy and cross-species communication potential, and invited him to train as a future ambassador. Cale paced the room, heart pounding. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered. But his grandmother, frail yet smiling for the first time in weeks, shook her head. "Maybe kindness is finally paying you back," she whispered. And so, with trembling hands and a heart full of doubt, Cale boarded a shuttle days later and soared into a world he never imagined touching. The academy was everything he expected and was, towering spires of glass and light, filled with students who sneered at his species and laughed behind his back. He was out of place, overwhelmed, and utterly alone. At least, until he met Lyra, a lavender-skinned diplomat in training whose curiosity about humans wasn't mocking, but genuine. "Tell me," she said with a mischievous smile, "are all humans as reckless and stubborn as you?" Cale grinned despite himself. "Only the good ones." And just like that, his impossible new life truly began. Life at the academy was nothing like Cale imagined. It wasn't just the towering libraries filled with centuries of interstellar history, or the classrooms where students debated the ethics of wormhole diplomacy. It was the stays, the sideways glances that followed him wherever he walked. To most of his classmates, humans were curiosities at best, embarrassments at worst. Yet, Cale endured. He learned. He adapted. And when the insult stung, he reminded himself why he was here. Not for prestige or power, but to build a future where people like his grandmother didn't have to suffer. Lyra became his anchor. Her sharp wit and endless questions about Earth helped him forget how isolated he felt. Their conversations were easy, playful, sometimes philosophical, and she had a way of making him feel like he wasn't just surviving here. He belonged. But just as Cale was settling into the strange new chapter, something happened that defied all logic. It began with his grandmother. During a regular holocall, she casually mentioned that her breathing had improved. "Better than it's been in decades," she said, before showing him something that made his heart stop. She raised her hand, and a cup on the table floated gently into the air. "Doctors don't understand it," she laughed nervously. "Frankly, neither do I." Days later, Cale felt it too. It was subtle at first, lights flickering when his emotions ran high, a datapad sliding across a desk without him touching it. At first, he thought it was his imagination. Then, in the middle of a simulation exercise, a heavy training sphere shot off its platform and hovered above his head. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to him. Rumors spread fast. Humans weren't supposed to do that. Some called him dangerous. Others, a scientific miracle. And in the shadows, someone was watching closer than anyone else, the same alien elder he'd fed weeks ago. Thorndex revealed himself soon after, not as a beggar, but as one of the wealthiest and most influential figures in the galaxy. And he had chosen Cale for a reason far greater than kindness. Humanity, Thorn said, his golden eyes narrowing, holds a power older than the stars themselves. And you, Cale Morgan, are the key to awakening it. Cale could barely process Thorn's words. The richest man in the galaxy, the same alien he'd handed a small meal to, had been watching him all along. And now he was telling him that humanity carried some dormant power that the galaxy had overlooked for centuries. It sounded insane. Yet, the evidence was undeniable. His grandmother's miraculous recovery, his own growing abilities. The universe suddenly felt bigger, more dangerous, and infinitely more complicated. But not everyone shared Thorn's optimism. Drax Dex, Thorn's ambitious nephew, saw humans as a threat to the balance of power. "You're handing unstable weapons to a primitive species," he spat during a heated council meeting. "This isn't evolution, it's recklessness." Word of Cale's powers leaked beyond the academy, and panic spread like wildfire. News feeds questioned whether humans could be trusted. Politicians called for restrictions. Protesters gathered outside the academy gates, some carrying signs of support, others demanding his arrest. And then, disaster struck. The main reactor core that powered Port Astra, a colossal energy system beneath the city, went into critical failure. Entire sectors were evacuated as alarms blared across the skyline. Millions of lives were at risk. Authorities called it a malfunction, but Thorn suspected otherwise. "It's sabotage," he said grimly, "and Drax is behind it." Cale didn't hesitate. "Then we stop it." He wasn't alone. Lyra, refusing to let him face danger alone, volunteered to help. So did several other humans whose abilities had begun awakening too. A girl who could see probabilities, a boy who could shift his body's density, and Cale's grandmother, whose mental connection linked them all in a shared consciousness. Together, they formed an unlikely team. The plan was desperate but simple. Breach the reactor facility, override the sabotage, and stabilize the core before meltdown. The problem? Drax's mercenaries were already there, guarding the control room. What followed was chaos, corridors filled with collapsing beams, energy surges that threatened to vaporize everything. Cale's telekinetic strength was pushed beyond its limits as he held back collapsing machinery while Lyra rerouted power flows. For the first time, Cale understood what Thorn had meant. This wasn't just about powers, it was about choice. And in that moment, he chose to fight for every life in that city. The control room trembled around them, alarms screaming as the reactor's countdown neared its final minutes. Sweat dripped into Cale's eyes as he strained against a collapsing support beam with his telekinesis. It felt like trying to hold back a tidal wave with his bare hands. But giving up wasn't an option. Too many lives depended on them. Coolant pressure stabilizing. Almost there. Lyra shouted, sparks flying from the console she was rewiring. Almost isn't good enough. Kale gritted, pushing harder, every muscle and nerve in his body screaming. Finally, with a surge of light and a deep mechanical hum, the reactor's core levels began to drop. The ground stopped shaking. The sirens went silent. And for the first time in hours, the city was safe. Cheers erupted in the control room. Kale slumped to the floor, exhausted but smiling as Lyra knelt beside him, her lavender eyes bright with relief. "Remind me never to underestimate humans again," she teased, breathless. Outside, the entire city watched live broadcasts of humans and aliens working side by side to save millions. The narrative Drax had tried to build, that humans were reckless and dangerous, collapsed overnight. Instead, they were hailed as heroes. Drax was arrested for sabotage and conspiracy, but Kale insisted on a different kind of justice. "If we truly believe in compassion," he told the Galactic Council, "we must extend it even to those who don't deserve it." His words stunned the chamber and swayed the vote. Drax was sentenced to rehabilitation, not execution. Weeks later, Kale stood on a balcony overlooking a city that had once ignored his existence. Humans were no longer dismissed as irrelevant. They were now vital members of the galaxy's future. A new initiative, the Intergalactic Alliance of Cooperative Evolution, was born, pairing awakened humans with alien mentors to explore their potential. Beside him, Lyra slipped her hand into his. "From a shared meal to saving the stars," she whispered. "Not bad for a boy who had nothing." Kale smiled at the horizon, where ships launched toward uncharted worlds. "Kindness," he said softly, "was always humanity's greatest power." And as the galaxy stepped into a new era, built on empathy, courage, and unity, it all traced back to one simple choice: a poor boy, a hungry stranger, and a shared meal that changed the fate of the universe.